welcome to the Secret to No-Show Detection Solutions Showcase. And yeah, thanks for taking time out of your day to discuss this topic with us and hear our perspective and our experience on a topic that's near and dear to the heart of your operations, which is no-shows. We decided to host this showcase after the Shift Work Summit, where we realized that a lot of shift work marketplaces are dealing with common time and attendance issues. And these issues are impactful to revenue and customer relationships, so they need to be solved. And in particular, the no-show issue is something that can be particularly stressful to the operations of a shift work marketplace. And that's when a worker is matched with the shift on the app, they commit to that shift on the app, and for whatever reason, they do not show up to that shift, whether it's a work site at a hospital or a clinic or a stadium or even a home, they don't show up at the predetermined time. HyperTrack validates over 1 million shifts per month. We work across industries: healthcare, light industrial, hospitality, oil and gas, and other industries. Saurabh is VP of Engineering at HyperTrack, and he works directly with customers in ensuring reliability and validating these 1 million shifts per month and making sure every shift is successful. So I'll go ahead and pass it to Saurabh. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Jared McGriff. I am head of product marketing here. And again, thanks for joining us. I appreciate your time. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Saurabh. Thanks, Saurabh.
Thanks, Jared. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this talk. We're going to be discussing shift work marketplaces and, in particular, the no-show problem. And from many of the customers I've spoken to, there is, or at least used to be, a certain amount of, learned helplessness around no-show detection because, things were tried very often. It worked a bit, but not all the way. So, what we're going to show you today is a result of working with multiple marketplaces and refining how what we have to target no-show detection. And in general, the lessons here are generally applicable to most shift work marketplaces. The numbers you will see are specific to the healthcare sector, but the lessons are pretty general. So the secret to no-show detection and, secret is that it's reliable location tracking. And we're going to get into, now that we know the answer, let's get into why and how. So, shift work marketplaces, regardless of healthcare or not, what you're doing is you are operating on a guarantee that the customer is going to get what they paid for, which is a worker who will show up at the shift. And since these marketplaces sort of exist in this space where there is a lot of uncertainty about whether the person is going to show up, and you don't really know much before they do. It's very essential to sort out so that the no-show issue, so that these businesses can work in a reliable manner and come to depend on these marketplaces. Essentially, what I'm saying is it's really important to make sure that the worker actually shows up. And some information we do know of is that almost half US employees admit to time theft, and it's reputed to be like an $11 billion problem. And that doesn't even involve like honest mistakes. And these are huge potential impacts to the gig economy, where this rate could be even higher. At the same time, there's a counter pressure that it's harder to guarantee the quality of workers on shift work platforms without getting into very heavy and expensive processes and paperwork, etc. So what you have is workers who are who are not so in tune with how your systems work. So they're low in quality in some ways, um, miscommunications, but they're also bad actors. And all this stresses the system, the shift work system, more than regular full-time employees would. Therefore, in this space, it's even more important to be able to detect and act upon, these surprises. So location intelligence is, the critical piece that allows us to tackle both no-shows and shift abandonment. Um, and then each marketplace decides what to do based on their sort of cost structure, etc. But at least being able to identify them and backfill them when possible is the goal that we work with. So so you decide that, okay, I'm gonna add location intelligence. Um, right now, there are multiple ways of doing it. You could add a geofence SDK. You could build it in-house. You could use HyperTrack. And each of them have some advantages and disadvantages. For example, there are plenty of geofence SDKs now. You can just drop it into your app. But location tracking itself is somewhat complicated, particularly because there are so many different variables that you have to figure out and how they sort of play with each other. For example, is someone standing still, or did they lose cell phone coverage and you're not getting updates? Or did they lose coverage and they're unreachable and they're not connecting? Or was that an adversarial action where they actually turned off the app by swiping up and therefore you're not getting any information? Say they're on the way, but say they took a detour while they're trying to reach their workplace. Does the detour mean that they are not intending to show up, or does it mean that they're getting coffee before their shift? Um, you know, when the device turns off, whether it ran out of battery, did they turn it off deliberately? Is it a network outage? Hard to sometimes tell what the exact issue is. Um, One issue, of course, not typically observed in the healthcare sector is the worker sitting in a bathroom and scrolling on their phone and not really working. It's a different kind of fraud. And but a more genuine case is, are your workers turning off your location tracking because of battery impact? And we've seen that a bunch of times. So if your battery consumption is high, then it becomes problematic for the user, and there's a genuine pressure on them to turn it off so that their phones are working for the whole day. So it's really a balancing act of trying to decide, um, between the risk um, of either nobody showing up, leading to a dissatisfied workplace, and the marketplace having to issue refunds, etc. Or if you backfill too aggressively, it leads to a situation where multiple workers could show up. So you have unhappy workers, and possibly you have to compensate both of them for the same shift where one was expected. Um, so yeah, so the other complications that take place, particularly when you try to either build in-house, is that you still have to solve the problem of waking up the device remotely, which is in itself a completely different problem. You have to detect when permissions are changed. You have to minimize your battery consumption. And you have Android and iOS as the two main OSs, but each device type introduces some variations into the mix, particularly for Android, where different, devices from different manufacturers has to be treated differently for all the above things, like waking them up or detecting permission changes, or how the battery is meant to be consumed, how to track it so that you continue tracking and you don't just stop sort of after tracking for a short while. And of course, then there is detecting mock locations. A new one we recently added is detecting when the worker is changing the time on the device manually to try and do some fraud, etc. So it's a cat and mouse game, and there are a whole host of issues. Um, so I mean, yeah, I spoke about some of the problems about how do you even tell if a person is working still, or whether they lost cell phone coverage, or whether they turned it off, etc. So these are all problems that we see day in, day out, and I think HyperTrack exists to kind of get to the bottom of this. So if, for example, if you use a geofence SDK and you start tracking your fleet, you get to a POC pretty soon, and you see that you're tracking well. 90 of your percent of your shifts had some location information. That's pretty good. But the brute force implementation doesn't lead to the outcomes that you really need, which is that even though you're tracking 90% of the shifts, you only detect 10% of no-shows and you only detect 50% of abandoned shifts. Um, and you see a lot of a very high false positive rate. And these numbers are actually taken from, you know, customers who've shared this with us. So so this isn't exaggerating. This is what actually happens. And as I said, waking up devices reliably is a hard problem. That's why you see such a low no-show rate. So what do you see when you try to wake devices up, when you want to start tracking a shift? You see that as you start tracking a shift, so on the horizontal axis is time. So you start tracking a shift 90 minutes before the shift starts. At t equal to 0, this is where your shift starts. You're hopefully that the person has either arrived or is very close to arriving. And on the y-axis is how much of your fleet you could reach when you started by the time that you started tracking. Now, as you see, as you expect, it's you know you get this kind of a curve if you use a geofence SDK, and it's pretty reasonable. And you see that you can track 80% of your shifts, but you can detect only 10% of your no-shows in this region. Now, what HyperTrack does is that it works really hard to wake up these devices. So HyperTrack wakes up devices with multiple methods and tries multiple times, and um, and tries to ensure that you get some information out of the device. And what you're seeing here is that so HyperTrack suggests steps of whitelisting, which is different for every manufacturer, particularly on Android, custom steps on iOS. It suggests how you should change your app itself, so tracking is not terminated by the OS at various points in times. And we since we have so many users on the platform, we see the edge cases crop up often enough that we can then start making recommendations for each of those. Um, so so HyperTrack works really hard to boost the tracking rate when you start tracking. It wakes devices up much more reliably than most baseline implementations. And so all that hard work, within moments, you kind of start tracking about half your fleet. And then there's a curve that, gets towards around 90% is where it will saturate about 2 hours after the shift. So with that, with adding all that work, we go from 10% of no-shows detected to about 40% no-shows detected. And that's getting somewhere. Now you can start using that um, for automated workflows to an extent. So that's what HyperTrack does. It changes the actual outcome and delivers the outcome that matters. But we still face an issue is that a shift that is not likely to a worker that is not likely to show up is also more likely not to track. And abandoned shifts also, they are very likely to turn off their tracking just before they abandon the shift. So what we're getting to is that visibility to the device, even when a location cannot be fetched or determined, is also of a lot of value. And HyperTrack, does that as part of it's the way it works as well. So what I showed you first was the time to first location, which is how long did it take us to wake up the device and get a location from it. The line you see in yellow here is similar. It's called time to first event, but instead of getting the location where it plots, were we able to wake up the device and get some information out of it? And typically that information is why can we not get a location from the device? So as you can see, the difference between the two is not much. It's a small few percent, but there's a critical thing here. If you zoom in this small 2% difference lies 10% of no-shows. And it's pretty similar for shift abandonment as well. So even though it seems that there is only 2% extra, tracking information here in terms of number of shifts, a number of devices, a number of workers, it does correspond to a high number of what you care about, which is no-shows and shift abandonment. So by fleet visibility, what do we mean? We try and get you some information, and we try and tell you whether The issue being faced with the device is behavioral in nature, which means that the worker would have swiped up and killed the app, or they haven't given the right permissions, or something of that nature. Like there's something on their phone that needs configuring, etc. And and then you can instruct them on what to do and change the fleet behavior and track better, knowing that. Adversarial is the other bucket where it's an action on the user's part, but it's an action where they are actually trying to, do something that you that is suspicious. Like, for example, uh, mock locations, mocking the time, you know, trying to do GPS spoofing, etc. Um, and then there are, of course, the OS outages killed by the OS for various reasons, etc. And this entire green bucket is actionable, which means that we can tell you what you can do to reduce. Um, the other two are sporadic and reachable outages, which aren't actionable because we get to know of them later. And these include, of course, network outages or other the app crashing, for example, is another one. Some other outages like that. But for a large chunk of them, we do bring them to you in real time, and you can solve them in real time, either through reaching out to your developers and making fixing the feature, or by reaching your users and telling them to change their behavior. And so essentially, what we see is that to improve no-show detection, the three things that you need. One is you need to to wake up the device reliably and relatively quickly. It's no point in knowing that the worker's not going to show up after the shift starts. You want to wake them up quickly. The second thing you need is tracking, consistent tracking. So it's sometimes, very often, without work being put in, you can wake up a device and start tracking it, but then the OS will throttle it and kill the app, or throttle the location tracking, and you won't get information after a few minutes. So to detect incidents, it's important to, you know, make sure that your um, app keeps tracking. And the third thing you need is outages, which have reasons and which have actionable recommendations. And that is the path to improving the tracking health of your fleet over time. So if you put these three together, you can eventually get to a place where you can detect about 70% of no-shows with low false positives before the shift starts. It's also similarly possible to detect like almost 90% of shift abandonment cases can be detected with low false positives if you get all this correctly in place. And we haven't discussed tracking consistency in a lot of detail, but that one is a little more sort of obvious to think through. So for example, issues like push notifications crashing the app, or incorrect settings causing the OS to kill the app, incorrect permissions, too much resource consumption, etc. So HyperTrack looks at these issues and can provide guidance, in some cases about why this is happening and how you can fix it. And for some of our customers, we figured out that their app was crashing, and what they could do about it, even when it had nothing to do with HyperTrack itself. So what I'm saying is that, yeah, it's a steep hill to climb, but it is possible to get to very good business outcomes by spending the work and time to do this. A quick word from some of our customers who we've recently worked with. Um, Mike Cook from Clipboard really pushed us hard and kept us honest, and he really helped us improve the robustness of our platform by discussing edge cases that we hadn't previously seen, and that's left us in great shape going forward from here. And a big thank you to Jason. He helped refine these ideas in this presentation. And Jason sees Clipboard as a leader in the technology space in shift work, and we look forward to him, presenting his own talk soon at the Shift Work Summit or wherever else. And as he said, it's a pretty big undertaking, and it's hard to know what to measure even in some cases. So we work closely with them to build this out with them. So that's that's the gist of it. How do you overcome the learned helplessness around no-show detection? You must have reliable live location tracking. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions that we have, and I'm sure there will be plenty.
Awesome. Thanks, Saurabh. Really appreciate you walking through that. Let's see if we have any questions here. So, just one question I'll ask here is, in terms of the implementation time for what you're seeing with customers, what have you seen and what is achieved in some of like what I would say is like
Yeah.
the first stage implementation or the earliest achievable results sort of implementation.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. It uh, we work with our customers pretty closely, and in 4 to 6 weeks, we can have it in their app live for the entire fleet. And we do actually have like a step-by-step process to doing this that takes about 4 to 6 weeks, which includes understanding the use cases that they need to service and how they should use the SDK, looking at their app together and the best way to integrate the SDK into their app. Then, as you roll out, solving the issues around permissions, etc. So every customer needs a certain amount of handholding there. Um, so it's a very sort of if in 6 weeks, if we're pretty confident that your app will be live with real location tracking, backend and front end, etc. But if you really wanted to just implement this by yourself, you can take our SDK and put it in your app in a matter of hours. And you can send a few API calls to our servers and set it up all in less than a day. If you just want to see a POC on a few devices or whatever it is.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So, and then one other question. In terms of, you mentioned the trifecta of no-show detection. What can people do or tech teams, what can they do to sort of prepare for this even at a more elementary level in terms of identifying some of these outages and being able to take action on them?
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, they could use HyperTrack, but it's so okay. Each of these is a problem that is so it's not that the problem is very like difficult to solve. It's just a very large body of work to identify for each device what issues you've been facing, what is common between them, and then solving them for each kind of device, figuring out when your app is getting throttled, um, all that stuff. And then outages similarly, under what conditions do you categorize as what, etc. It takes a lot of effort to do it the first time. And that's kind of the benefit, that a lot of companies who need this share resources, um, with that HyperTrack is and sort of solve it together. I mean, I don't know if I got the question fully answered, but I mean, if you're thinking about this, one of the things I would say is, build your app such that it doesn't crash. It's a pretty important thing to do.
Right. And then one other question here is what is the location reliability before implementing HyperTrack and what is it after? So if you were looking at that
Yeah.
delta, what
Yeah.
what
So this curve tells the story mainly. The baseline here is a geofence SDK, um, with additional work done to try and make it more reliable by the customer and wake up devices faster. Um, and that's the hypertrack line. So that is the wake up rate, and this in a way also has the reliability, as in once you wake it up. So reliability has two components, right? Waking it up, and then once it's woken up, that ensuring that it continues tracking. Um, Both of those get folded into this graph because if you do wake it up, but then it stops tracking, um, you know, points would start dropping off this line.
right,
Um, so typically for us, once a device starts tracking, it does not stop tracking unless the user stops it from tracking or unless the app crashes, typically not related to HyperTrack, but something else that in the app would crash, causing tracking to stop. For most of our customers, we can get it to a point where once woken up, it does continue tracking with certainty.
Yeah, gotcha. Cool. Excellent. Well, I think that's about it. Well, let's see, there's one more question here. So, what type of analytics are available in the solution with HyperTrack, reports, et cetera, for flagging no-shows and other operational issues?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we do have a pretty full-featured dashboard where we have, you know, sort of metrics at various levels. And HyperTrack is an API platform. So, all the data, you can fetch it into your own systems and further analyze it as per your needs. Um, and that said, no-shows and detecting no-shows, HyperTrack gives you the base to build it. And while we do have a no-show risk, we do need to work, and each customer does have some unique things about their fleet that needs to be taken in and folded into their no-show detection metric. And in particular, the main thing is how sort of the false positive versus true positive rate. So, for example, in any statistical problem, if you say that, okay, the person is 60% not likely to show up, and you say, I'll backfill, you still have a 40% chance of being wrong there. So if your business is such that the cost of a second person showing up and the first person is also coming is very high, um, then you have to be more careful about backfilling. So these trade-offs are, unique for each customer, and they do need to work hard to sort of get there. But HyperTrack gives them the base that allows them to build it up.
Gotcha. And it looks like there's one more question. Can you show the product or send screenshots of reports after the webinar for flagging no-shows? Um, yeah,
Yeah, Jared, I think you can take that.
yeah, I'm sure we can share this with you, and we'd also be happy to
Yeah.
do a demo. If you can, you're showing up as anonymous actually. So if you can share with us your contact information. You can send me an email directly, and we can get back to you. Are there any other questions? Yeah, I think that's it for questions. So yeah, thanks again, Saurabh. I mean, it's clear that there's a lot of nuance here, and folks really need to think about their processes, their goals, how they think about risk within their
Yeah.
organization, and the particular behaviors of all of the workers within the workforce that you're working with in your particular marketplace. All those things obviously come into play and need to be kind of stepped through in a thoughtful process. So appreciate you outlining that for us and sharing that insight. And for everyone joining, thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to catching up with you on your particular issues and hear about your experience in managing these time and attendance matters in the shift workplace, the shift work marketplace. So thanks again. Take care.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
I'm going to walk through some key embeddable views from the HyperTrack dashboard that's powered by Amazon Web Services. These views are built to make the day-to-day operations management easier for your ops teams. Let's jump right into them. Let's first look at managing the fleet. Workers are a critical part of your shift work business, and HyperTrack has an embeddable worker ops view that firstly provides aggregate metrics around the number of workers working shifts, a tracking health metric to understand how well these shifts are being tracked, and potential outages that can result in reducing your visibility into tracking these shifts. The top outages are identified, and the steps to reduce these occurrences are provided in the outage report. Next, the list provides information at the worker level. Information on the work done, the distance traveled, time spent during the shift on different activities, and the overall tracking health is available and can be exported using the UI or consumed through APIs. Let's look at the order ops view. This is your ops team's portal into all the shifts created. Similar to the worker ops view, the filters, the aggregates, and the list provide ops with visibility on how shifts are progressing. Outages and risks show up to help ops understand what to triage. The map provides visibility into where the shifts are taking place along with the timeline. Now, let's take a look at a couple of escalation scenarios that an ops member would need to resolve. First, the worker reports that they haven't been paid for their 5-hour shift. The order profile view with a combination of the timeline and the map can help resolve this. From the data on the left, we see that the worker clearly arrived early. Octavia stayed in the shift location for an hour and a minute, and this can be verified by looking at the visit data in the timeline. Octavia was here between 12:45 a.m. and 1:47 a.m. and spent the remainder of the 4 hours, 7 minutes outside. From this data, it's clear that the worker left early. Next, let's look at a no-show scenario. This is terrible for business and causes customers to lose trust and eventually churn. Here, we see Chloe never arrived at the customer location. HyperTrack provides real-time updates in such scenarios through webhooks that can automatically trigger workflows to find another nearby driver and transfer the shift seamlessly. This ensures that your customers are not impacted by such unforeseen scenarios.